How's it going, everybody? This is going to be episode number 3 of the Conscious Bodybuilding Podcast. Today, I have Dr. Mike ISRAETEL on. He is does have a PhD in sports physiology. He is the lead researcher at and co-founder of Renaissance Periodization, and he's also a practicing bodybuilder himself. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's not terribly off.
Cool. So the reason I'm having Mike on today is I look up to him in a lot of ways, and I really believe that bodybuilding needs to start to embrace the more evidence-based approach more often. I believe that there's still a lot of anecdotes circulating. I feel like there's a lot of outdated practices that are still being pushed by some of the top level athletes and coaches in bodybuilding, especially IFBB professional bodybuilding. And I kind of want to create a dialogue around evidence-based bodybuilding and maybe why some of that stuff isn't the most optimal way to be going about things. So my first question that I have for you, Dr. Mike, is what would you say to enhanced bodybuilders, or maybe not even enhanced, but people who say that the evidence doesn't apply to them? I think that is more specifically to enhanced people, but what do you have to say to that?
So enhancing with pharmaceuticals definitely changes some things, but it doesn't change them in a completely qualitative manner where it's just up becomes down, left becomes right. It usually changes them in magnitudes, like naturals can train a certain amount and recover. Enhanced people, given the identical conditions with enhancement, can train more and recover. It's not like twice as much or 10 times as much or a tenth as much. It's like, 33% more or 50% more, 166% more. Nothing crazy. So all the principles still apply. And fundamentally, muscle grows in very, very similar ways between naturals and enhanced. It's just enhanced are enhanced, so they can both get away with more and be more specific and particular and get more out of those specifics and particularities. So they just, it's advantaged. And I would say that probably the best analogy to make on enhanced versus not enhanced is good genetics versus bad genetics. Like if you have good genetics, it's really stupid to tell people you don't need the evidence, because you might not need the evidence yet. Then you get into a competition where you are competing against other people with very good genetics and you take fourth. You may never used to that sort of thing, and now all of a sudden how the world works might be interesting to you, and you start reading science that applies to people with not so great genetics and think, let's see what of this applies to me. And because human bodies with good genetics or not work fundamentally the same way, drugs or not, they work fundamentally the same way. A lot of the evidence, especially the basic stuff, that's very sort of deeply theoretical, applies to everyone. And just how it applies is a little bit different, but that's where the art and science kind of blend. And that's what coaches are for. But you can still be enhanced and be super evidence-based, and where there is no evidence, you have to do your own thing, but you can still do it on physiological rationale. You don't just throw out everything. And as by the way, the people that win everything in bodybuilding, almost all of them have coaches, and those coaches are very evidence-based. They read pharmaceutical literature like crazy. They read nutritional literature like crazy. They know a ton of stuff. Try peaking for an enhanced show and using diuretics without having an evidence-based background on what Lasix and all that stuff does. Like, it's going to be really bad. So a lot of times the enhanced community hasn't caught up to scientific training quite yet, but they've been very, very scientific about their supplement use, and very scientific recently, especially with their dieting. And the scientific training is just coming. And if you're enhanced and you think science is dumb or bullshit with regards to training, you're going to be holding you're going to be holding the hot potato when everyone in the enhanced world is already training scientifically in 10 or 15 years, and you're the last idiot saying dumb shit. Really, because it's funny. I imagine saying something about drugs, imagine being in the 70s and saying well, just take a shitload of tests and you don't have to worry about all these specific compounds. It's bullshit. And then, Dan Duchesne's book comes out and tells you how to really do things properly, and leads to the 90s revolution where everyone gained 30 pounds of muscle. They'll be like, maybe evidence-based is a good idea. That book was, so Dan Duchesne didn't actually bodybuild himself. He just read studies. That's all he did. And he managed to put together the knowledge that other coaches like Chris Aceto and Chad Nichols took and ran with, and Milo Sarchev and all those guys. And then they produced the biggest athletes of all time. So you don't want to be, holding the shit end of the stick saying evidence is bullshit when it comes around to training. And it's getting there slowly but surely.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with you. I think I have seen more of that. I think maybe sometimes what gets more attention is the stuff that isn't as evidence-based. Maybe it does lie in some evidence, but I think it's also just how people are. They just are drawn to things that may be more of a quick fix, or preaching something that might not be, you take the easier way to get to things. So I guess that's maybe what I see
For
sometimes.
sure. There's also a problem in bodybuilding as perceived versus bodybuilding as how it really is on the enhanced side. Because on the enhanced side, the guys sort of kind of do whatever for training, and they have pretty meticulous diet that's often not very well explained because the diet interaction with peptides, insulin, and growth hormone is so extreme in many cases that the only way to justify why the nooks and crannies of the diet are the way they are is from the perspective of peptide use. But people just don't talk about that stuff. In the United Kingdom, it's legal to use, so they talk about it some, but it's still taboo. Most people don't talk about it. It's not in the main magazines. It's not on the main Instagram pages.
Yeah.
So you can get this perception that like the way you get jacked is, benching with a partial range of motion. Like, what's that guy's insulin protocol? Be like, well, just take a lot. Like, no, that's not how insulin works. You don't just take a lot. He's got someone on his side telling him exactly what to take, exactly when, exactly how. He pays that man thousands of dollars every month. And that's the person that's fueling them, through 30 or 40 pounds of muscle. And because people just never see that, they think, oh, the enhanced side is just not evidence-based. Like, it's evidence-based on the enhancements, but you just never read about that anywhere. Like, if you ever type in, just try Google pro cycle, like pro steroid cycle. You get like some like T Nation article from 4 years ago that like has a sample cycle, and because it's by like a guy named Shadow Pro, we don't even know if it's just pure make believe, right? Like, some of it looks reasonable, some of it looks insane, but you never know. You don't know what anyone's using, and you don't know how scientific it is. If someone said like, I don't do science, and then they wanted to win a top national level show enhanced, the coach that they hired, if they said like, I'm not into science, the coach would be like, oh, that's cool, man, I'll take care of that part for you. Here's what you take in exactly the quantities. Like, that's science, motherfucker. Like,
Yeah, it's maybe not labeled as such, but it is. Yeah. What was I going to say on that? Well, I guess, yeah, it is kind of going in that direction. I think it's really easy for, I've been in that realm, and I've worked with some of those coaches, and I've seen other people saying, oh yeah, you take this much. Some of the more mainstream guys say, preaching large amounts, grams of cycles, and then you work with these coaches and you realize that's not really what it takes, and then what they're actually prescribing. So I agree with you on that. Well, so to get into the training side of things, I think, and I guess this is just my observation, but I believe there's somewhat of this emotional attachment to constantly having to, I don't want to say beat yourself on the ground, but you have to be a good bodybuilder, you have to constantly hurt yourself. And there's somewhat like this emotional attachment to training to failure. I guess that's maybe more specific to certain people I don't want to name, but why is training to concentric muscular failure for multiple sets, multiple days in a row, maybe not the most ideal for someone who's trying to maximize hypertrophy?
Yeah, it's nearly ideal on the stimulus front, so it actually does grow a ton of muscle, maybe the most muscle. Problem is, it's not ideal on a fatigue front. The ratio of stimulus to fatigue that it provides you is not as great as training a little bit shy of failure on average. So something like 2 reps shy of failure is probably going to give you the best bang for your buck on average for how much stimulus you get versus how much fatigue. So if you have to train once and grow as much muscle as you can in any one session, then you're almost certainly going to want to train everything to complete concentric failure. The thing is, training doesn't occur once. It occurs later that week, and the week after, later that week after, and blah, 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 maybe like 4 weeks in a row. So you're going to want to pick a way of training that not only stimulates you very well now, but doesn't cause an excessive amount of fatigue so that you don't end up paying for it later and just not being able to train as consistently as very hard. And the way to do that is probably start a little bit shy of failure, maybe 3 reps in reserve or something like that, and then slowly make training harder over time until you get close to failure, get to failure, and then after you get to failure, there's really nowhere to push because you're so fatigued, you're just completely wrecked. Probably time to deload and really let the fatigue go, and then sort of re-ramp the process over again. But training to failure is not a bad idea, and there's a notion a train to failure is the best is very understandable because the failure is just about as hard as you can train. Going beyond failure, I suppose, is even harder. But all the research on it says it's just not required that sets of 3 reps in reserve or even a little bit more cause identical gains in beginners and intermediates not using drugs. And since drugs make it easier to grow muscle, there's no reason to suspect that people who use drugs have any reason to go close to failure. As a matter of fact, it's so funny about bodybuilding culture. Am I allowed to swear in here? Swearing okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. So like nut riders of physique pros will justify anything they can just to not ride longer. And so when they say like, you're trying to justify failure or whatever, you say, you need to do failure because failure training is better if you're on drugs. Like, okay, sweet. So how do you explain the 90s bodybuilders who never went to failure and they're just super jacked? Like, well, that's just the drugs. Like, so okay, one reason, so the drugs both need failure and benefit from it, but you also get away with drugs and not train to you don't even know what your mind is. Make up your mind, right? You could say like, well, the guys today train to failure, but the only reason they get away with that is because of drugs. You'll be like, no, failure training is great. So like, if you decide to not ride on failure training, you'll use anything you can to justify it. To me, the best evidence you can get isn't even in the studies; it's in personal experience. I mean, if you do multiple sets to all-out failure, it's something you instantly recognize as not sustainable. I have trained, and most folks probably don't know this about me because this is way before Instagram existed or Facebook existed. I trained for years with multiple sets to failure, every set to failure. And I got pretty good gains, but I was always so much more beat up. And I didn't even deload. I didn't know what a deload was. I mean, have you ever read about deload in Flex Magazine? I sure as hell haven't. Not in 2002, I didn't. So what ended up happening was I figured out how deloading works, and I figured out how reps and reserve work. And all of a sudden, my training just got like 50 times better. And I was like, holy fuck, I can't believe I was going to failure all the time.
Yeah.
And if I've tried since then, a couple times I tried to go to failure. Every week, and there's progression falls apart because the fatigue is massive and you just can't make the same gains. Some of my best cycles I've ever had, for example, like shoulder pressing, is when I've started real far from failure, like 4 reps in reserve, and just increase the weight a little bit each time. And with deloads, I could manage like my fault. I could manage like 16 weeks of progression and hit the strongest I've ever gotten on overhead press. My delts got fucking enormous. Some of the worst cycles I've had of overhead pressing is when, you get greedy in the first week and you're like, I got to hit 10. And your body's like, you should stop at 8. And you're like, 10 it is. So those are some of the worst because I hit 10. It did a good job, but it was real close to failure. And the next week, I couldn't even hit a PR. I was so fatigued from just the minimal number of sets that I was like, fuck, like I have to deload now. And then what do I do? So there's a thing about sustainability. Shy failure, training close to failure is good. Training at failure is not sustainable, which means it's ideally suited for the end of a training cycle, probably not ideally suited for every single cycle that you do. And the instant response is like, well, we can reduce fatigue by training less. So if I go to failure but just do 1 or 2 sets, I get the same results as someone going shy of failure, but they have to do 3 or 4 sets. Well, it's actually not true because they've tested this directly in laboratory. People who go shy of failure experience roughly the same gains per set as people that go all the way to failure. So if someone can do 4 sets, 3 reps in reserve, and someone can do only and that's the same fatigue as 2 sets all the way to failure, that person who got the 4 sets done, 3 reps in reserve, probably grows like 1.5 times more muscle in that session and accumulates the exact same amount of fatigue. So if you're going to pay the fatigue cost, you might as well pay the cost of the biggest benefit. The biggest benefit is usually training just shy of failure, slowly working up to it, not starting at it and going right away.
Yeah, I've noticed some of the more evidence-based coaches who preach more of a progressive overload approach. I think they're going in the right direction, but I think some of them still see a deload potentially as just going to failure, but just less often for less sets or whatever. And I've heard you talk about, yeah, no, most definitely. I mean, I don't necessarily knock. They have a lot of other good things that they do say that I think are effective. But I think one thing that I've heard you say before too is it kind of like extends the amount of time of, I mean, you may be chronically fatigued, but maybe you can get a little more before maybe even like an injury happens. You're just extending the amount of time before you become like a really overreached state, maybe if you aren't already there. Is that kind of in line with what you're saying?
Totally. So like, if you deload by doing fewer sets to failure, you actually have to ask yourself what it is you're shooting for. Are you trying to grow muscle on a deload? No. One of the reasons that you're probably not trying to grow muscle on deload is because if you think you could, so what is a deload's number one function? To drop fatigue. That's it, to reduce fatigue. If you think you can grow muscle and reduce fatigue at the same time, you had better stop training in any other way and train only like that. Can you imagine discovering a training method that could increase muscle mass while decreasing fatigue? Oh my God. Not only would you be fatigue free, you could come in super fatigued and start growing muscle at a great rate and get even less fatigue from your old program. And then we'd never have to deal with fatigue again. That would be amazing. But that's not true. So almost by unfortunate definition, any training amount or difficulty that grows muscle is going to add fatigue. So then the next thing is, okay, so because we have to reduce fatigue, the training we have to do cannot also grow muscle. It just maybe conserve muscle, right, at best. And the next question is, what kind of training do you need to conserve muscle? And the answer is, you can take a week off and pretty much lose no muscle at all. but you can actually lose less muscle and drop fatigue faster if you take like a very, very easy deload, like way reps in reserve, so like, and then just very few sets and just gotta go through the motions. Okay, great. What if we train a little harder than that during deload? Quite a bit harder. Still not hard enough to gain any muscle, but harder. So training at a certain level maintains our muscle and reduces fatigue. And then here, this is how hard we're training if we're gaining muscle, right? What happens between these two? Like if you train here, it's harder than you need to keep all your muscle, but it also adds extra fatigue, or it prevents fatigue from falling as much, because you're not adding fatigue yet, but you're here. Any training more difficult than this just prevents the fatigue from falling as quickly. If we train here, right here, fatigue doesn't fall at all. And right here, it begins to accumulate, right? So any training here is fucking stupid. You want to train as little as possible to conserve all of your muscle mass and let as much fatigue dissipate as possible. To quote Andy Fry, who's probably one of the preeminent researchers on overreaching and fatigue accumulation, when you hit the brakes, hit them hard. Like it's almost like saying you're going to take a day off of work and you only work like 7 hours that day instead of 8. Like, is it really a day off? No. But you know, people are addicted to the idea of training hard, and really they're addicted. It's a compulsion, I think. You go into the gym, you want to fucking smash it, and you'll feel like a piece of shit if you don't smash it. We all have those feelings. Like, why the fuck do you think we all bodybuild? Because you feel like pieces of shit if we don't. But you know, if you want to be as good as your genetics truly allow, you're going to do things that are intelligent and wise, not things that you feel like doing. Like if I only felt shit like I'd feel like doing, I would probably be in Las Vegas as a sports scientist. Wait a minute, I'm already in one of those, JK. But seriously, like it's one of those things where, yeah, like deloading sucks, right? And training easy sucks. I had a guy compliment once on how much weight I was squatting, even though I was deloaded. But my first thing I wanted to say was like, well, you should have seen me last week when I was doing like 20 more pounds than this for literally like 8 more reps. But you know, sometimes you have to go in the gym and feel a bit ridiculous, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, I think that exists in the bodybuilding realm, also along with dieting too, is being able to, like, I mean, even today I was just trying to have some food that wasn't on my plan, and I almost have this like guilt associated with it. Same as if I step into the gym and I'm not going all out, you know, pushing myself till I fall down on the floor. It's almost like I have this guilt that maybe has been instilled in me, or I just believe that that's how things need to be. And it's really difficult, especially someone who maybe is really rigid as a bodybuilder, to stay, okay, let's take a step back, so that you can take more steps forward, right? Instead of
Totally.
be sidelined by an injury because you weren't able to do so. So
Totally.
I agree with that mentality 100%. And especially I think this quarantine time has kind of forced, I mean, it's forced me to almost do more of a maintenance, and it's forced me to kind of, I mean, even have the time to do something like this, whereas before I'm like, okay, gym all the time, you know, always going hard 100%. And if I'm not, you know, I don't feel necessarily the best. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, notice how you said that you don't feel the best. The bodybuilding is not for how you feel; it's for how you look. So you got to do things to make you look the best, not feel the best. Can you imagine? We were at Jared and I were actually on a podcast with John Jewett, who's an IFB pro, and he basically says, like, once you're at the Olympia level, and he actually took, like, he's top 10 in the Olympia last year in the 212s, and he was like, when you're at this caliber, your number one thought is no longer actually of getting as good as you can. It's like tied with, don't fuck up and get hurt, because like you only have so many Olympias in you, like literally. Like most guys have like 1, right? Some people have like as many as 10 that they show up, and you got to do it right. So for him, it's like, you know, he's, let's say, in Olympia prep mode. He looks at an exercise and he's like, should I push it to failure / put a little bit more weight on the bar than maybe I'd be super comfortable with? You know, for us egotistical gym bros with nothing else to do, like, yeah, of course, bucket, slap the weight on the bar, brother. Like, high five your friend or whatever, slap on a stick, the usual shit you do in the gym, right? And then for him, it's like, okay, if I do leg presses with 515 pounds instead of 500, I may eke out a tiny little bit more muscle growth or muscle preservation to be a little tiny bit bigger on stage. But if I get hurt, I'm fucking myself so hard that I might not even end up on stage, or I'll end up on stage in something that's 95% of my best, which is to say out of the top 10. So at that point, once you really, really give a shit, you can't do shit you feel like doing. You got to do shit that you know is a good idea. And some of that's not egotistical. I mean, John's a fucking guy. Like, he's a human male. He wants to fuck shit up in the gym. I want to throw dumbbells into the mirror, right? But like, maybe that's not a good idea at all times. And you got to do what's a good idea versus what you feel like doing, plain and simple. That's like probably the biggest rule of life you can ever come up with.
Most definitely. Yeah, I think there comes a point, and like you said, I think even just maybe practicing that, you may get more Olympias in you because of that versus maybe someone who does do all out muscular failure, who doesn't maybe look at the evidence and things like that. We talk about maybe they are able to get where they are by not using any evidence at all and then just going to the gym and throwing stuff around. But how long potentially would their career be if they just did how they felt and just went in the gym and haphazardly did things, I guess.
That's a really good idea. Hypotheticals are important. They are very limited, but they're important to illustrate principles. People say like Ronnie won 8 Olympias and he just only ever trained himself. Okay, well, before he hired a sports nutritionist, Chad Nichols, he won 0 Olympias, and he credits every Olympia to Chad Nichols. Like literally, he's like, why did you become? He went from like 9th at the Olympia the year 1997, and then in 1998 he got first, and then never got anything less than first until like 2005 or some crazy shit. And they're like, what was the change? And he's like, I hired a nutritionist. That's it. So imagine if Ronnie hired like a super competent sports scientist or trainer to run his training. Maybe he would have stepped on stage in 2003 not at 287 pounds. Maybe he would have been 295 pounds in that same conditioning. Maybe he would have won 9 Olympias instead of 8, and would have been unequivocally the best of all time. Not best of all time with the caveat that it's tied with Lee Haney. So people say like, well, what's his name does it? Can you imagine like, so this is another like criticizing the nut riders thing. People love to nut ride. And they'll say like, well, it's good enough for Jay Cutler, it's good enough for me. If it's good enough for Ronnie, it's good enough for me. Like, right on. Would you say that about Steve Reeves back in the day? Like, can you imagine like we teleport like young Phil Heath, or like here's crazy thought experiment. You take Phil Heath and you put him into like an avatar body, like just a skinny dude, and you time machine him back to the 1950s and 60s or whatever when Steve Reeves and those guys trained. And he'd come up to the gym and be like, hey, why are you doing that? And someone's like, you fucking dare question Steve Reeves? He's fucking Mr. Olympia. Like, he'll never look like this. Like, what would Phil do? He would chuckle. He'd be like, actually, if I showed you guys what I really look like, you guys would all retire immediately and just hide. Like, so careful that you're nut riding current top guys doesn't end up being just religion. And you actually find out that in 20 years, those same top guys or their new replaced versions are saying the shit you used to say is stupid. You know what I mean? So times change, and it's good to think for yourself versus just try to justify shit with being like, well, it's the best. Well, maybe the guys could be even better if they did more optimal shit.
Right.
The best guys don't know everything. They don't. And the guys that will know everything or very close to it will look better than the best guys. That's it.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you think maybe I think you believe also too that things are kind of moving in that direction. Do you think that maybe we'll see more of those people at a higher level in the coming years? Maybe more people.
So. Yeah, on average, it's going to trickle in. Things change, man, and things change drastically over long time periods, and we just don't have an appreciation for that sort of thing usually. In the 1960s, the NFL football teams did not lift weights because they thought it was going to slow you down. The average NFL lineman in the 1960s, from what I'm aware of, weighed 225 pounds. Think about that, like 225 pounds. There are people in the NFL today, running backs, linebackers, fullbacks, that could play every single position better than everyone in the NFL 40 years ago. Every single one. Could you imagine that? Be like, what position should play? Everything. Give me the ball. I don't even pass the ball to anyone. Try maybe block for me, maybe don't. You imagine a 270-pound guy that runs like a 4.6 40. Just like, who's going to stop that guy? Nobody. Back in the 1960s, if you said, hey, I think football players could benefit from training with weights, people would be like, no, you idiot, that's going to slow you down. Like, you're gonna question what the best guys do. It's scary for me to think what the best NFL players are going to be like in 2040. Holy fuck, they could be like doing crazy shit and just be unreal athletes even more than today. That happens with every other sport.
All look like Ronnie Coleman.
Exactly, right? Like, there's still guys in the NFL that are carrying some extra body fat. Maybe they'll carry more muscle and less fat. And then holy fuck. Yeah. And then the same goes for bodybuilders. Like, what used to be Lee Haney in the late 1980s, early 1990s was the standard bearer of size, right? Just 10 years later in the late 1990s, Lee Haney would have been like an average size to below average size for his height guy on the Olympia stage. And, now you got guys on the Olympia stage that have taken that Ronnie Coleman size, and there's guys reliably coming in with ridiculous conditioning at all sorts of sizes. Mm-hmm. And it just seems like, oh my God, how is this possible? Like, Phil Heath at his best, it's like, or we'll take Brandon Curry, the current Mr. Olympia. I mean, what Oxygen Gym did to him, certainly evidence-based stuff they're doing over there with Farm. He's got the proportions of a 90s pro with like 30 pounds more muscle than the pros in the 90s.
Oh yeah.
What are you going to do about that? Like, you know, like all those guys look good on their own in pictures, but if you put Brandon Curry next to those guys on a stage, you'd be like, oh my God, where did this man come from? I mean, and that's because Brandon Curry embraces new stuff, and new stuff works. So it's always good to be keen on figuring out what's evidence-based and what's best practice.
Yeah, Brandon Curry is a great example of that too, because I think a lot of people wrote him off for a while, and
Oh yeah, I wrote him off. So who the hell is he?
He started embracing the more evidence-based approach. I mean, he was referencing Scott Stevenson in one of his videos I saw.
Sure.
And I mean, yeah, he just came out of nowhere and won the Olympia. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, not nowhere, but definitely
out of Kuwait.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's really cool. I mean, so then I guess maybe some of these people who aren't embracing that are just gonna get left in the dust, really.
Sure.
You know, so. Okay, so another thing I wanted to ask is about volume. I see a lot of debates about this. Sorry, my Siri just turned on. Hold on. I don't know why it keeps doing this.
Everything looks good on my end.
So there's definitely, it seems like some camps, like there's some people who train super low volume sets to multiple sets to muscular failure, maybe even people who are training with high volumes with muscular, a lot of sets to muscular failure. I've had coaches in the past who were probably pretty reputable, pretty well-known guys give me like programs where I had 30 to 40 sets in a contest prep scenario. For myself, that was way too much, but I was just curious, maybe if you could explain some of your volume landmarks to some of my audience, and maybe MRV, and maybe why the volume might not be the most optimal.
Sure. So like there's a couple of what we term the volume landmarks, and everyone has them. They're just a little bit different for everybody. Everyone has maintenance volume, the amount of training you need to do on average to keep your muscle mass. It's just not that much training, and there's some good research on it. Probably like if you train twice a week, then like two to four sets per muscle group per week is probably good enough to maintain, or very close for any level of athlete. So if you have even a high level bodybuilder does 4 sets of full range of motion pull-ups or assisted pull-ups hard, and then later that week he does 4 sets of barbell bent rows or machine rows hard, he's probably not going to lose any appreciable muscle mass indefinitely just doing that, right? And people usually think like, well, you need way more to maintain. Like, actually, you need very little to maintain. You need much more to gain. So the next thing is, how much volume can I train with to at least start gaining the minimum effective volume, like the least volume I can do to at least get some gains. And that tends to be higher. And in advanced athletes, the minimum effective volume is usually considerably higher than the maintenance volume. So remember, we talked earlier about that like window of the deloading, and like any more than you maintain, but less than you have to do that. There's maintenance volume and minimum effective volume. That's exactly what that is. The more advanced you become, the higher minimum effective volume comes, because like you just have to do more and more and more to get the same adaptations you used to, and maybe just any adaptations. And at some point, your minimum effective volume gets so high that it's very close to what's called your maximum recoverable volume. That's the most volume you can do and consistently recover week to week, or rather recover for the next week of training. So imagine if like your body just won't grow from any less than 18 sets for back per week, and that you can't recover from any more than 20 sets weekly for back. Well, what would happen to you if you did a 15 set per week program? You probably wouldn't grow. Okay. What would happen to you if you did a 22 set per week program? You could do it for 1 week, and then the next week would be total shit. You wouldn't grow, and you would have to deload, and that'd be super stupid. So for you, something between 18, 19, or 20 20 sets per week is probably what would be something that results in growth. And for most people, their windows for volume are bigger than that. But they're not infinitely sized. And knowing your own volume landmarks, specifically what your minimum effective volume is and maximum recoverable, and training somewhere between those two is a good idea. There's debate in the fitness community, especially right now, about should you be walking from minimum effective volume all the way to maximum recoverable every mesocycle? Should you be maybe trying to shoot the middle? Maybe you should start for one mesocycle at close to minimum effective and then slowly work up over mesos. That's less clear, but I don't think anyone's debating that all the gains in the world happen between your minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable. And the biggest pity in the world is people that don't know that those landmarks exist, even intuitively, and who have no idea if the amount of volume they're doing is where that is in a spectrum, right? So some people say like, oh, I did really well with a low volume program. Well, that means it was above your minimum effective volume. But you have to ask yourself 2 questions. How far above was it? If it was pretty close to your maximum recoverable volume, you could actually be doing less volume on average and get even better gains. That would be incredible, right? Or it was just over your minimum effective volume, and if you did even more volume, you could grow that much more. Like, so just because you found an effective program doesn't mean you found the most effective program. But by being a little bit flexible and sort of in some way, whether it's week to week or mesocycle to mesocycle, working from lower volume ranges to higher volume ranges and seeing where the stimulus to fatigue ratio is the best for you, seeing where the best gains are, can allow you to learn your body. And this is different for each muscle group that you have, and it changes a little bit over time, but it can basically allow you to get really, really good workouts and get the most out of your training without just shooting in the dark. It's one of the, this isn't a stupid question. I'm going to say this as politely as I can, but people say, like, what do you think of German volume training? Well, once you read anything about the volume landmarks, like, well, it's 10 by 10. They could be right between your minimum effective volume and maximum recovered volume, and then it would work well. It could be above your maximum recovered volume, and you just shit blood and stop. And it could be below, unlikely, but for some very hard gainers with very slow twitch muscles, it could be below their minimum effective volume or at the very close to it. And then it would result in very poor gains or no gains at all. So much better than seeing a program like 5 by 5, 10 by 10, is to experiment in your own training and start at the very low end of training and slowly work up in volume over time, deloading every now and again and seeing how your responses are. And you'll notice sooner or later where your best responses are, where you have the best workouts, where your strength gains are the best, and where you grow the most muscle. And then you'll understand where your volume landmarks are. And then all future training is super simple, because somebody could, let's say you do know what your volume landmarks are. Let's say your minimum effective volume for back, if you do, let's say 3 sessions a week, is 10 sets per week, and your maximum recoverable is 20. If someone's like, hey, do you want to do this back workout with me? And the workout itself is 22 sets for back. What are you going to say? You're like, no, that's no, because I'm not going to recover from that. They're like, how do you know? Because I know my body and I've practiced and I've experimented. And every time I go to 18, 19, and 20 sets, my body just shuts down on me and I can't make gains. And then maybe someone will say like, hey, back training, it's only 4 sets per week of back, but it's ultra heavy. What do you think? You'd be like, I think that's not a good idea for me to do. They'd be like, why? Because I've chronically tried to do less than 10 sets per week, and it just doesn't lead to any hypertrophy that I can measure. And then once you know that about yourself, oh my God, you've unlocked sort of the riddle of volume. And yeah, there's particularities about how you cycle between your minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable, but as long as you're getting somewhere between the two, you're doing a really great job. And that's the biggest problem, is people a lot of times just don't even know their own volume landmarks at all, and they're struggling with body parts that they shouldn't be struggling with.
Yeah, I think I was in that camp myself. I didn't really know much about, I was trying to design my own programs prior to finding your work, and I didn't really know much about, I think that's probably how I found it. I can't remember exactly, but I didn't know much about how to structure just the amount of sets to do per week, because I've been told all different things. And one thing I wanted to ask based on that is, so you kind of answered it a little bit, is that you'll find your MEV, MRV based on your data, right? Based on if you're keeping track of your lifts, right? It's going to tell you something there. There's something in the writing where you're going to be getting stronger. Obviously, maybe some physical appearance changes too. If your goal is hypertrophy, you're going to get some of that data feedback. And if you start declining, you could potentially be in your MRV. Does that make sense? Is that kind of?
Yeah, or below your MEV. But if it's like a really low volume and you're getting weaker, then it's below your maintenance volume. So you basically have a situation where you could do a certain average volume per mesocycle, right? So you can just, it doesn't have to be the same volume every week, but at the course of a mesocycle, accumulation and the deload, there's going to be an average volume you do there. Like, let's say you went from 12 sets all the way to 16 and then you deloaded, right? So your average is 14. And you say, with 14 sets, how is my strength progression after the deload of the mesocycle? Like, mesocycle to mesocycle, am I making strength progression? And you can, probably the best training is the one that gets you the best strength progression over multiple mesocycles. Like, if you're gaining strength in the rep ranges you want, in the rep ranges of training, 5 to 30 sets of 5 to 30 reps, the fastest strength gains there will probably correlate in the long term to the best muscle growth, because it's really just a symptom of muscle growth at that point. Your nervous system can only help you so much with repetitions. At some point, you got to get bigger, right? So if you look at your results and you say, okay, training 6 sets per week for back, I didn't really gain a whole lot of strength after 2 or 3 mesocycles of that. I probably got to do more. It's unlikely to be less, right? And that's where the normative literature comes out, like literature of direct scientific studies on people who were told to do a certain number of sets, and then they measured growth, and one group did more, one group did less. So we have an inkling from science and from just common experience and practice of what's realistic. Because some people say like, well, what if my minimum effective volume is like 1 set per week? It's like, well, how many people out there are doing 1 set per week? Like, well, almost nobody. Okay, so it's probably not that. How many research studies found that 1 set was better than 3 sets or 5 sets or whatever? I'm like, well, none. Okay, so it's probably more than that, right? So we know your minimum effective volume is probably more than like 4 or 5 sets a week. And it's probably, it's unlikely to be like 20. It's somewhere between those two. So you start kind of at the lower end and see how your results are, and then you just play with experimenting with to try to do a little bit more volume and see where you get your best gains. And over time, you sort of learn that. And the cool thing is about maximum recoverable volume, as long as you're making your training harder over time, it'll come to meet you. You don't have to come to meet it. Make you whatever amount of training you do, eventually it'll be too much volume to recover from, because the accumulated fatigue plus the volume itself is going to be too much. Once you're no longer recovering, then you need to deload, and you look at that number of sets that you were doing before you need to recover, and for that length of mesocycle, for that particular style of training, that was your maximum recoverable volume. Here's an example. Let's say you're training with 12 sets of back per week. If things going well, you go up to 14. Everything's going fine. You go up to 16. You start to get pretty tired. You go up to 18. You can barely maintain your performance. You go to 20, and your performance actually declines. Is it possible there was a chance you just had a shitty week in the last week and you could have kept elevating your performance? There was. So you sort of repeat that mesocycle. You go again from, 12 to 14, 16, blah, 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 get to 20. And again, like at 19 sets, your performance shits the bed. And then another mesocycle later at 21 sets, your performance shits the bed. Are you really going to bet that there's some magical way you could figure out to train that's going to let you do like 20 sets plus? Probably not. Not with that scheme. So now you know your maximum recovery volume, and at least know that you get decent gains above 10, and somewhere in there is some of your best gains, and then you probably shouldn't be training chronically with any more than 20 sets. My approach, and the approach we take at Renaissance, is you should probably just start most mesocycles close to that lower value, minimum effective, and slowly within the mesocycle, as your body adapts to more and more training, increase the amount of volume you're doing by adding a few sets here and there in an auto-regulated fashion, and then end up at your MRV and deload and repeat. But you can absolutely choose another way where you just smash, like go right into 15 sets, right between 10 and 20 as an example, and do 15, 15, 15. And when you get tired, or basically you can't do any more high performance, you can't beat your performance or match it, then you've hit your MRV, which is now 15, but just a longer mesocycle. It took you longer to accumulate. And then you deload, and then maybe you could play around with trying 17 and seeing if that's a better result. But in any case, you don't want to train with like 35 sets, and you don't want to train with like 3 sets, because both of those are probably wrong.
It's a range is basically what you're saying. It's not going to be just like maybe when you're in a calorie deficit. It's not a hard 200 calorie deficit that causes you to lose weight. It's sometimes this range, right? It's not and I think that's important, is that there's no objective way yet of determining this. So we have to be really in tune with ourselves, which I think, like we were talking about earlier, I think that sometimes bodybuilders just tend to just work through it. This is, oh, my knees are supposed to hurt, and I'm supposed to feel like, this chronic fatigue. And I've been in that position too before, where I'm like, I just need to keep working, training 7 days a week and doing multiple sets of failure. And I think that it's important. You need to be really in tune with yourself to be able to identify, when you're at your MRV, right?
Totally.
What are some other like physical signs, before we get off that topic, like that maybe you're at your MRV, just so for certain, maybe because there's other things that could be at play, like maybe you're tired one day or something. But
yeah, so the ultimate sign is performance. You're unable to match or beat your rep strength from earlier. Like say you bench 200 pounds for 15 reps last week. This week you bench 200 pounds for 14. It tries, you can't get the 15th. Technically you might be over your maximum recoverable volume. It might be for whatever reason, but that's why you can't just estimate it once. You have to go to decrease volume, deload, and then ramp back up and see if that same thing happens when you reach too much volume. But there are some other things that should occur alongside that. Your muscle should kind of feel like jelly. You can start getting into overlapping soreness where you never heal from, like, say you train chest Monday, Thursday. By the time next Thursday comes up and you're doing like 18 sets of chest a week, you're still sore. Like, okay, well, I'm probably not going to perform at my highest because I'm super, super damaged. If you're taking your whole body from MVV to MRV towards the MRV, you're going to feel much less motivation to train, much more fatigued. You can even get sleep disturbances. Your appetite can decline. And all of those things can be a part of normal training. As long as your performance is still stable or going up. Once your performance starts to decline, especially 2 workouts in a row for a muscle group, it's time to deload, and you've probably hit your MRV. And a couple mesocycles later, you'll be able to determine, okay, this is what my MRV really is. It seems like reliably when I get to 20 sets, I start to fall apart. I can't perform anymore. So then maybe going, any program that designs an accession of 20 sets is stupid. At the very least, you just take that away from it.
Cool. Yeah. Man, I'm holding back on a lot of things here because I've had coaches prescribe a lot of this stuff.
Oh yeah, same here.
Yeah, but and I honestly are kind of like where we came from as far as training. A lot of that same stuff, just taking a lot of sets to muscular failure.
Just go as hard as possible.
Yeah, it's funny. Okay, well, to get off that topic, that's really good because I think sometimes I don't pay attention to those things, like I said, and then I think a lot of people don't. So I just want to have some outline things to look for because I just more started embracing a lot of like RPs stuff in your volume landmarks within like the last 6 months to a year or so.
Oh, cool.
And I'm starting to like get more of a feel for a lot of these things. I actually bought a couple of your products and eventually want to work with some of you guys. But yeah, that's good to know what to look out for in that area. Sure. Okay, so importance. I have all my questions written here, but what is the importance of full range of motion training and standardizing form? Again, this is from observation. I have a big bias of this. But, seeing bodybuilders do the half rep push-ups or half rep pull-ups, bench press that you only come a little bit off your chest. One thing I want to say before just my observation is I think that maybe the reason, obviously a lot of these guys are genetically elite, but maybe the reason why they're growing is because maybe they're creating a full range of motion throughout multiple movements, what they may call angles sometimes, different angles. But I see them doing a pull-up here, and then they're doing a pull-down to here. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe they could just be doing the pull-up with the full range, and they could do much less volume, get much better results. What do you think of that? That's kind of just my theory around it.
Oh, I think that's very wise. I think that's definitely true. I will say that getting growth isn't terribly difficult, especially if you have good genetics and you're taking the right farm. The question is, how sustainable is that growth? And is it the most growth you could be getting? So guys will step on stage at 235 pounds and compete at the top level for 2 years before injuries and not placing any higher get them to quit. If you do full range of motion, you both grow a little bit more muscle objectively, but also your injury risk is much less because you're using much less absolute load. And maybe then you'll compete and be 240 pounds on stage instead of 235, but you'll be able to compete for 4 years instead of 2. And at the peak of that 4-year competition, you might be able to win a pro show instead of taking third. Because a lot of guys look at pros and they think, man, look at him, he's a pro, he's doing everything right. That guy doesn't look at himself like that. He looks at like Phil Heath and Sean Roden and Brandon Curry. Think those guys are doing everything right. I'm a piece of shit. So if you can catch that guy and be like, do you want 2 more years to your competitive life? And do you want, to be a little bit more muscular and less likely to get hurt? They're going to be like, yeah, sure. We're like, well, train like this. Right. But a lot of them never hear that from anyone. And we're all fundamentally, I think it's pretty easy to explain why people mostly do partial range of motion. It's because they're male and they're full of testosterone, often 10 to 50 times as much as normal. And, you know what I'm saying? You want to handle them big ass weights, man. And like people try to explain why bodybuilders train with partial range of motion. They never try to explain why almost every other gym rat and gym bro and just regular guy trains with a partial range of motion. Like, if it was really a secret of the pros, why the hell is everyone else doing it? Why do high school students default to training like that when they know nothing? Because they're just egotistical, and most bodybuilders, their ego doesn't leave. And if they don't know any better from a technical perspective or a literature perspective, why the heck could they ever change? A lot of the reason we bodybuild at all is because of ego. So I'm not going to take 8 plates off the leg press, put the 8 plates on there. I want to do half reps. They don't think of them as half reps. They think I'm like, well, you can always rationalize stuff. I'm like, well, I'm challenging my musculotendinous unit with more load. Yeah, that's it. Like, right on. If you don't read the literature, you don't know the full range of motion is better. The way I got into full range of motion was actually not reading the literature at all. It was the perception of the fact that I got way better stretch, way better contraction, way better mind-muscle connection, and a better pump for how much weight I didn't have to use when I was training with full range of motion. And I was like, holy fuck, this just feels great. And then I realized, like, it's so easy to standardize in this program you're training and progress in it. Like, if I bench all the way to my chest and all the way up to lockout every time, I know exactly how strong I get, how fast. There's no question if I'm having an effect. But if your bench press idea is to just do this bullshit, people say shit like, first time touching 405 in this cycle, like pretty good. Like, what do you mean touching? Like, for how many reps? How much total work did you do? What was the distance? Like, how do you know you got better? You know, like you might have just like shortened the range of motion subconsciously
Yeah.
and then done more weight, and you're no bigger. And the you're no bigger part, like let's say you don't grow for a year and you've just been lying to yourself. Whatever you thought was working isn't. You should have been changing shit. Like if you clearly show a bodybuilder like you're not growing, and over the past 4 weeks you haven't grown, they'd be like, what do I change to grow? But if you lie to yourself by never standardizing your reps and your technique, then you can get away from the idea that you're, whether or not you're growing, you could essentially insulate yourself from it. And that's, I don't want to be insulated from that, man. I want to know. And it's humbling and it's annoying, and I can't use as much weight as everyone else in the gym, but I'll take it. And then look, when you can use a ton of weight with full range of motion, you'll be a real baller, because then people really get confused seeing you, because they watch you unload the squat and you walk back with 4 plates and they're like, all right, it's pretty strong. And then you go all the way down and pause and come back up. They're like, fuck. I've had people come up to me, and I had a black dude come up to me once in a gym, many times with one guy specifically. Something about like black guys will just give it to you more straight than everyone else. He just looks at me. He goes, because after I did like 315 this is way back in the day, I did like 315 for a set of 12. Like I sunk it every single time. He comes up to me. He's way bigger than me. He goes, "You a bad dude. You a bad dude." That's all he said and walked away. I was like, that's the greatest compliment I'm going to receive from anyone. But it was like, if I had walked out with 4 or 5 and done half reps, he might have been like, there's like 10 other guys at the gym that do that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so it's worth it. But it's a nasty
sure.
ego. Yeah, it's a nasty ego bite, especially at first. Especially because here's the thing: like I get to be on my high horse. Like I'm pretty jacked, I'm pretty strong. So even for full range of motion shit, like it's like pretty impressive to most people. But like it sucks when you're an evidence-based fucking twig and you weigh 140 pounds and you're like, well, like Dylan and Dr. Mike said to do full ROM, and you're using your 40s for bench, and the guys next to you using 70s with a partial range, and they're about the same size. I'm like, am I doing something wrong? Like they're already graduated the big boy weights, and I'm an idiot that believes in a full range of motion. All I'm saying is don't give up, and eventually you'll be doing the 70s with full ROM. You'll be bigger than those guys and less hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of have to step away from a lot of what people are doing in the gym when you try to embrace some of this stuff. I mean, if you look around and that's how you're formulating how effective your workout is, I think that you might be doing the wrong thing, right?
That's a great point.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been in that boat too. I just recently standardized my squat form. I got a wedge just so I could I feel a little more comfortable getting more depth. I made a wedge actually. And, I was squat. I think the best I did was 455 for like 20 reps one time. And, but exactly. And now I'm doing, I think I did like 185, all full depth with a little pause at the bottom. And I can barely get like 10. And I mean, that's a really, if I let it, it could be a huge kick in my ego. Like,
sure. How do your quads feel though?
Oh, they're burning. They're burning. Before I would feel it in my back and I'd be like so gassed, but I just couldn't tell you if I just trained legs or not. Like I just, and my back would get injured half the time. I thought it was squats. I was like, oh, it's squats. They're
people
causing
say that all the time, though, right? Don't you read Instagram and the magazines and bodybuilders will say like, yeah, squats aren't good for me. Like, what do you mean by squats? And you see them squat, you're like, oh, awesome. That's bad for everyone. Don't do exactly. That. That's not a squat.
Yeah. No, squats are awesome if you do them right. But the thing is, I didn't have a standardized form, so I was going a quarter of the way down one day and then halfway, or I was shortening range over time and just loading my spine. Like I was just loading my back and getting nothing effective done.
You just described my first 8 years of training legs.
I mean, I'm 10 years deep, and this is like 6 months in. So
there you go, same timeline. Yeah. Is someone training for 5 years? Like, yep, in 3 years you're gonna start to train legs properly.
Oh my gosh, I mean this is really a marathon when you look at it, because I'm like, man, I probably had like a year or two, maybe of like effective, really good training under my belt now, like over my whole 10-year span.
For sure.
Cool. Let's see how much we have left. Cool. I'm gonna get you out of here. Just a couple like quick fire off questions. Wanted to ask you a little about nutrition. So I noticed that you and Charlie did a cut recently. I was just curious. You guys ate a lot of like, or I don't know, Charlie did ate like a lot of the low cal toast. This is no way a loaded question. I'm just curious. In a deficit, what is your regard for micronutrition, and how are you able to get that in? Like, obviously, I know you're just posting the toast, so I don't see what else you're eating per se. So I just kind of want to know what is the regard? What are like the RDAs? Are you trying to hit those? Is there a conscious effort towards that? I mean, I'm sure there is, but
yeah, totally. There's conscious effort on two fronts. One is we take multivitamins and multiminerals every day. I take a couple things that the human body usually lacks in hard training athletes, like vitamin D and zinc and all this other kind of stuff, especially for enhanced people. And then in addition to that, we just eat mostly healthy foods that are well-rounded. So lots of lean meats and
Whole foods.
healthy fats and lots of grains and tons of veggies. I eat tons of veggies every day when I'm dieting, and some fruit as well, and dairy. So that's really like just a really healthy diet, just less shit. So Charlie absolutely eats the low cal toast, but hilariously, it has a lot of fiber in it.
Yeah.
That's just a part of what he eats. And a lot of the other stuff he eats is just most like he'll eat a ton of rice and cauliflower and all these other veggies and tons of meats. So micronutrition is definitely a factor. And we don't eat like these, it's a great question, because a lot of pros, well, like they don't even eat veggies, dude. They just have like here's my meal: white rice steak, white rice steak, white rice steak, fish, white rice. And you're like, where do you get most of your vitamins and minerals? Who knows, right? And again, micronutrition, in my view, for elite performance athletes in the medium term months is overrated. Your body's very, very good at getting all the nutrients it needs. If you just eat meat and a couple of basic grains, you get most of everything you need in the short and medium term. But in the long term, it really does behoove you to vary your intake and eat plenty of fruits and veggies. And I think at least eating a varied source of veggies during prep is a good idea. Like if someone's going to tell me that eating some broccoli slaw, same grams of carbs as like broccoli slaw with white rice, is somehow way worse for you as a competitive bodybuilder than eating just white rice and no broccoli slaw, like what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
Yeah,
that's just wrong. It's got to be wrong, and it's almost certainly wrong. And a lot of times people eat these meals just out of convenience. And lastly, a lot of bodybuilders, when they prep, and this is something I'm glad we can talk about the enhanced stuff a little bit, a lot of the modern preps are, it's difficult to describe this in words, they're what I would call full push preps, where you say, like, are you losing fat or gaining muscle right now? Like, I'm doing both. Prep is just when you take like an inordinate amount of gear and see if you survive. So a lot of the guys are on so much shit, they don't even have appetites anymore. And they're on so much slim that they have to push unbelievable amounts of food. Once you have to eat a certain amount of carbohydrate, you're not putting any fucking veggies in your rice because you just throw up after a certain point. That a lot of those guys just eat white rice and white potatoes because the only thing that goes down is just a little fiber as possible. They would just shit blood if they had broccoli with every meal. So a lot of people don't know that. So they'll, in the evidence-based community, or not evidence-based, people that aren't jacked and are on a ton of drugs, they'll try to like replicate that. They'll eat just white rice or just potatoes and a little bit of steak and chicken. I'll be like, I'm so hungry and I'm like lacking micronutrients. Well, don't do that shit. Save that shit for when you weigh 280 and you're dieting to 265 dieting, which just means you take more Tren every week and you're not dead. So you show up on stage and then maybe then you'll have fewer veggies in your diet. So it's a lot of stuff that's unsaid that you look at Instagram posts, you're like, they don't eat veggies. Like they would if they, could. And sometimes they just can't.
Right. And I just wanted to address that because it's easy to see. I mean, you see these people who post up their cheat meals and it's like, and they're like, how, someone's like super lean and they're all the time. And they're like, how do they stay so lean when all I see them eating is In-N-Out burger? And it's like, well, that's one of the 50 meals they eat this whole week. You know what I mean? It's not the whole picture. So have you had an In-N-Out burger since you've been in Vegas, by the way?
No, and it's not a priority, but I've been to California about 600,000 times.
There you go.
And I've had In-N-Out a bunch. As I was saying, In-N-Out is good, but I'm not on the In-N-Out train of like it's the greatest thing ever.
Oh, really?
I know that offends people. And
I'm an In-N-Out guy, so
I'm ready to be controversial. We're now officially enemies.
What's the better?
As far as burgers,
I mean, I have
In-N-Out's a fine burger. It's funny. You caught me off guard. I don't have like a tally of burger places that I think are amazing, even though I like burgers. I think I'll say something really fucked up. I think you can get a fine burger almost anywhere. I know that's anathema. It's basically like I just became an apostate to burger lovers everywhere. And I'm probably wrong, but to me, I'm just not into burgers much. Like if you ask me, like, where do you get the best burrito? I have an intense list of replies to that, which is really, really specific. So.
Specifically to burgers. I mean, I think bodybuilding has made me like, I don't know, my palate isn't super like complex. I just can get a burger and I'm just like good.
Anything with flavor is better than the shit you usually eat.
No, but okay. One, if you're ever in Venice, I lived there for a little bit. 26 Beach Restaurant has really good burgers. So if you're ever in that area, that's a really good place.
I did go to Gold's Gym a few times, and I ate at the Firehouse, and that was actually really good.
Firehouse
Like, it's
pretty good,
amazing that it's so, like, it's not like the best tasting food, but the macros relative to the taste are like,
yeah.
holy shit,
It's totally
really,
totally bodybuilder friendly. It's awesome.
yeah, you just get like a super big clean meal. It's awesome.
When I lived there, that was just awesome. Just, you know, train and then go down to Firehouse. I mean, that's
you were living life, young Arnold.
Yeah, I know. But the 26 has a peanut butter jelly and bacon burger, which is really good.
Dude, get the fuck out of here.
Oh, what?
Hipster
Yeah.
shit. Not supposed to
really
mix
good.
that stuff, god damn it. You're not even American.
All right. Off that topic, just one more thing before I get you out of here, man. How do we bring more attention to the evidence-based approach? And I wrote here, do we yell more?
Gotta yell. Must yell. Specifically at older people and children that you don't know, because they respond really well to the yelling.
Yes.
So I think the ultimate best way to do it is to preach the good word, practice what you preach, become great, as great as you can be, and coach as many people very well with kindness, with patience, and with effectiveness, so that you end up being someone who contributes something to the community of, oh yeah, like Dylan, I heard that guy, man, some of his athletes are ripped as fuck. I gotta read what he's saying. Like, you want people to say shit like that about you versus like being a really polarizing figure, because then you'll make as many enemies as friends, and a lot of people will just like really, really resistant to listening to what you have to say. At the end of the day, the evidence-based approach to training will eventually take over the enhanced side of the industry, when the vast majority of people that are enhanced are evidence-based, plain and simple. So as an evidence-based community in the enhanced world, we just have to get more lean and more jacked than everyone, or coach athletes that do. You know, every time John Jewett goes up a placing at the Olympia or these pro shows, it's an improvement for evidence-based folks. Every time John Meadows does better and better when he used to compete, or when his athletes do better and better, it's more evidence-based stuff. Shelby Starnes, I don't know if you remember him, but he coaches pretty much all the top women now, and he gets them lean to the
crazy athletes.
It just doesn't make any sense. You're like, how? What are you doing? How are you not dead? Where is your body fat?
For women, the shredded quads is just the glutes and everything.
Some of these women get leaner than everyone, like men, women. It's just to the point where it doesn't make any sense. It's insane. But like, Shelby's very evidence-based and very calm, very rational, and that kind of thing. Like, you know, there's coaches still in the pro ranks in the male community, which are like, kind of just like feed people all the gear in the world and see who doesn't die. But in the female community, it's getting to be a more rare thing, because if you're one of the top girls, you probably work with Shelby, and he probably does the right thing, and he sort of leads by example too, where if you want to coach the best females, if some client maybe doesn't have time or money to work with Shelby, or she hasn't yet worked with him, she knows he's the big deal, she's going to be like looking at coach's plans and remembering what Shelby wrote for her. If it's way too far off the mark, she's like, why do you do this? And they'll be like, well, you got to fucking do it, brother. And she'd be like, nah, Shelby gave me a way better explanation. And then so basically it's one of those, like, if you're not like what's the best, then you're out. And guys and girls who coach catch on to that real quick, and they're going to be like, well, what does Shelby know? And they're like, oh, evidence shit, science, and all this pharmacology crap. I got to learn that too. And then eventually 20 years later, everyone kind of knows the basics. You know, it's funny. Back in the 60s and stuff, nobody knew myofibers were. They didn't know concentric, eccentric. Now you talk to the average pro bodybuilder, he knows what that shit is. He might not be applying it 100% correctly, but he knows an eccentric phase. You know, most pros in the 1980s, what the fuck is an eccentric phase? Now they know, right? So again, we don't appreciate things that happen over long terms of improvement. 20 years from now, you know, everyone's going to know macros. Everyone's going to know this and that, and not everyone, most people. And then that will be the standard. So just raise the standard by being a better coach, better athlete, better human being. And eventually, if evidence actually works better, you and your athlete should be beating everybody.
I mean, I think that's great. I think that's, I don't know if I knew exactly, but I think that's really why I started this podcast, because I want to create a dialogue with people like you. I want more of this to be out in the sphere, and I don't know. I kind of want that to be. I want to be a part of that. Sure. I guess. And so, I mean, obviously, like, I haven't myself haven't achieved much in the competitive aspect. That is my aspiration. Yeah, that's my aspiration. So, and if I can just, like you said, lead by example, be a part of that voice, that is really important to me too. And I think that's
Sure.
great. I think,
And don't forget how much you can change by coaching. You know, Matt Jansen is one of the top prep coaches now, and he's quite evidence based. And you know, like, how much has he done in bodybuilding? I don't know. Like, he's not pro. He's done pretty well at nationals, but not a top guy.
yeah,
Like, he's not known for his physique. None of the guys that works with Matt Jansen ever looks at him as like, this is a guy I got to work with. Like, he looks great. He's super jacked. By pro standards, he's a regular guy, probably below par, which is why he's not pro. Same here, right? How come people work with Matt? Because he fucking gets other people in shape, man.
yeah,
And he's gotten like 10 athletes to the Olympia, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, who'd you work with? Matt Jansen. Like, maybe I should work with that guy too. So even if you never yourself become the most jacked human on the planet, you help other people along the way. You know, first you work with local competitors. They get into great shape. They say good things. They talk to other people at the regional level, and those guys come to you. Then now you're dealing with a genetic stock that's better, and eventually you got 2 or 3 guys to turn pro. Once you get one guy to turn pro, you got sort of income for life as a trainer and coach, because everyone wants to be that guy. And then once you do really well and attract other pros and stuff, all of a sudden the influence grows. The only thing you got to do is do a good job, be personable, and actually have strategies that are effective. And that's where evidence-based is really handy, because the shit works. It's great.
yeah.
It's already a solved problem.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know, man. That's probably the most it seems like you understand it really well, and then I never was able to really put that together, but that makes a ton of sense. And I think it's great that you are contributing to that. And like I said, I'm just trying to do my part in that realm, because I really think it's really important to get this information out to people. So
We're all just leaves in the wind until the technological singularity comes and the robots take over. So just try and do our best until then.
well, I think that's a great thing to end on, that piece of advice. Uh, Again, thank you so much for coming on today, Dr. Mike. Where can
My
people
pleasure.
reach you as far as?
Sure. So we put a lot of YouTube content out now. Renaissance Periodization YouTube, or just type in Dr. Mike ISRAETEL on YouTube. And we put out like multiple videos every week: science of training, science of dieting, all that stuff, tons of hypertrophy stuff. So that's where to find me. And Instagram at RPDRMIKE, and RP Strength on Instagram at RP Strength. Come learn, and hopefully do less dumb shit and do more smart shit.
And I just want to say one thing on that. RP Plus, I am subscribed to it, and it is awesome. I am someone who didn't choose a more formal education because of maybe some of the personal disbeliefs I have with the way it's set up, and then it doesn't work with me.
Join a club.
but that platform is so amazing with all of the lectures that you have on there. You have the slides up next to you, the way you explain everything. It's just so digestible for me. I think that's one of the main things that was so hard for me about school. I'm an audiovisual learner, and being able to have the notes, being able to pause the video, take notes on it, it's just been so tremendous
Thanks,
for myself.
man. Yeah,
So,
RP Plus
thank you.
is like, our pleasure. RP Plus is basically a resource where there's hundreds and hundreds of lecture videos. Each one, like, there's multiple courses in RP Plus of sports science, and it's like currently it's free, thanks COVID. But it's like usually $10 a month or something. So it's the cheapest education you'll ever receive. If you really want to dive into the stuff at a super deep level, RP Plus is the place to look.
I agree completely. Oh, and you didn't mention, do you have a site for your used posing trunks that you sell them by any chance?
I have a couple OnlyFans sites depending on how I look, because I have a big beer mode and a chiseled mode.
Oh, nice.
And I have used posing trunks. To be honest, I just wipe my ass with them and send them off, because how many posing trunks could I possibly have? They're not all used. They have my fluids on them, but it's not like I posed in them.
Oh, good. Okay.
Most people just don't care about that when they want your used trunks. As long as they smell like you, that's all that matters.
Cool. Well, I'm glad people will be able to get to you for those as well. Thanks again, Dr. Mike. I'll hopefully talk to you soon, man.
Super. Thanks for having me.
See ya. Thank you all for watching. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, like the video, and check out the description for links to all of my other services such as coaching and apparel. Thanks.